Live Well presented by Rapala. I'm Tommy Sanders. That is Ronnie Moore right there. We started out, Ronnie, with the back-to-backers in Texas. Fantastic. We got the Classic done up at the Grand Lake of the Cherokees. Back-to-backers in Florida. And now we're going to make it one stop, a single stop this year in the state of South Carolina. But if last year was any indication, it should be a good one.
Yeah, it'll be a little bit later this year. It'll be in the month of May instead of the month of April. But this is the midpoint of our season. By the time day 2 rolls around at Lake Murray, we will be exactly halfway through the Bassmaster Elite Series season, and no better place to kind of make that transition to the summer transition than at Lake Murray, where we can see a lot of things up on the bank and offshore at this tournament.
Yeah, absolutely. They're catching them last time all over the lake, just about everywhere, and catching them good as well. Everyone who wanted to contend for that final day, they weren't giants all the way through uniformly, but you needed a 4 or 5 pounders in your limits, your cumulative limits, in order to make it to the top 10. And 10th place wound up winning the tournament.
Yeah, we can see the expectation of being a 6.5 to 7.5 pounder for the big bass in the tournament. Maybe not as big as we've seen in other tournaments this year, where we've seen 10 pounders and 8 pounders and things like that. But Tommy, the thing about Lake Murray is the overall average size of these fish. 4 pounders, it's almost like I like to say it's like a southern smallmouth place, because the average fish size seems to be a 4 pounder. 20 pounds is something you scoff at. So you better not have a bad day. You better have those 20 as your bottom line, and then 23, 24 maybe as your big day. And you'll be in that 80s, maybe 90 pounds at tops for the winning weight most times at Murray. But like you said, Tommy, last year we saw a lot of spawning fish. We saw the shad spawn start to come in factor, especially in Drew Benton's final day. And there was a lot of guys who didn't make the top 10 who really prospered on that shad spawn in the morning. And then we also had a herring spawn mixed in. Now when we think about the herring spawn at Lake Murray, you think about running and gunning. But last year, because there were so many fish on the bank and some starting to make their way off, running and gunning was not as prosperous. That is more of a May, June, July thing, and you'll start to see those offshore rotations of spots really factor in. We saw it, but it was for the best of the best, the guys who knew their pattern and trusted their locations. You can't just run anywhere and everywhere, but in May, you can start to run anywhere and everywhere.
And those guys told us, the guys that successfully fish one, there's some established spots to catch those herring. The key is to get your rotation, your timing locked in. That separates you from the crowd.
Yeah, and there's going to be different moments in this tournament. We always think about the herring spawn and the shad spawn as the first 2 hours of the day. Hey, I hope we have a little bit of low light so it extends. But Tommy, there will be an angler that pops up on Bass Track at noon, 1 o'clock with a big bag, and very quickly we will start to wonder, did they just enter all their fish, or did they just catch those? Because the afternoon can be just as prosperous for those herring fish. And there's going to be a variety of ways that anglers can target them. Those shallow, flat points, you know, when we say connected to the mainland, it is those points that when you look at the contours, they extend all the way off. It's not a broken hump that's way offshore. That's the midsummer, late summer type deal for a lot of these places, especially if there's cane or brush on those points or those humps. But those really shallow clay points, those really shallow rocky points, that's going to be where we see a lot of these fish. And oftentimes, Tommy, when you start to see them school and you start to see them bust the surface, it's almost too late. Some of those fish have already eaten below the surface and they're just showing themselves above. So you're going to have to be on your game, right place, right time. There's going to be anglers driving down the lake that hook a Yui and swing in on a spot because they start to see it happening.
The long points, of course, they're going to be a big deal. We also got the lay downs. We've got boat docks.
For sure.
We've got lots of different places where we've all seen big fish caught.
Yeah, we saw last year with Hunter Schrock, he dominated the shallow game. Even though Drew Benton won that way, Hunter Shryock lived that way with a wacky rig and a topwater all week long. Drew Benton was sight fishing and then capitalized on the shad spawn in that final morning. So Hunter really rotated docks and those riprap stretches, and that can be a deal for sure. But I think we're going to see some of the ends of docks play. You know, we saw the first few feet of the docks right up on the shore. As these fish start to transition in lesser spawning
even
and
under
more,
the walkways.
yes, for sure. When more are in the post spawn or just finished spawning, whether they're guarding fry, those docks will still factor. It just might not be tight to the bank, which means you can cover docks a lot quicker. If you're covering the first 10 feet of it, you know, out to deeper water, that's going to be a lot quicker than I have to go all the way into the front side of the dock and then come all the way back around and go dock to dock. It spends a lot of time, but anglers this week are going to be able to spend time at the ends of the docks and then jump out to secondary points if they so desire.
Might be easier to list the approaches, the baits, the techniques that aren't going to be used than the ones that will be used with. Great variety, I'm assuming, like we had last time. Maybe not so much the spawning fish, it's focused.
For sure. Well, like we said, a wacky rig around docks is always going to be a player. If there's any shoreline grass, There could be, you know, shad spawning around those or things like that. A swim jig like we've seen play the last few Elite Series events could definitely be a deal. And then when you think about those herring fish, it's going to be a jointed swim bait. And it's not necessarily, like a glide bait works and a glide bait has drawing power, but that is much more of a slow, you know, wide S curve type of deal for a swim bait. But those multi-jointed swim baits that really snake through the water, really tight movement, that is what a blueback herring looks like, and that is what they're trying to imitate. So we're going to see jointed swim baits that you can reel really fast. We're going to see some glide baits on some big structures for sure at times, but then top waters, no doubt about it. Whether it's the straight line, like whether you see a buzz bait or a plopping style bait up on the bank, or you see a walking style bait offshore. And then obviously this generation with electronics, you're going to see a jerk bait. Maybe a Rapala Maverick comes into play, whether you're looking at fish on your graph or just trying to catch fish off the ends of those points without throwing top water that they see all the time and without dragging something on the bottom. But like we saw Jason Williamson and we saw some of those guys, Brandon Cobb, Patrick Walters, the South Carolina anglers that know herring, Davey Height's going to be one of them that knows that.
Yep.
You can throw a jig offshore. You can drag a shaky head. Those bottom-dwelling baits are still factors even for fish chasing herring, which are always on the move. Dragging slow through some of those areas hours after they schooled, we'll still pick up some stragglers, but those stragglers can be 5-pounders.
Bring all your baits.
Yes,
That's good advice right there. Okay,
exactly.
The Minn Kota Bassmaster Elite, May 9th through the 12th, coverage right here on Bassmaster.com. Thank you for joining us for the Live Well presented by Rapala.